I have been in the habit of talking to the media at the airport when I come back from important trips abroad. But recently, because of the time of the arrival of the aircraft, I don't know if it's a change in schedule. I'm usually ending up here coming back at night. So I have not been able to brief you as I have been doing with respect to what we were engaged in and so on. So I did make the arrangements to talk to you on Friday night, but we came in too late, so we scheduled for the first opportunity, which is this morning. So I'm really pleased that you are here, and I would like to take the opportunity to encourage the local media and those who pay attention to us here in Trinidad and Tobago and CARICOM to be up to date on where we're at. But for you to fully appreciate what we're doing and the implications of what we are facing and doing, you need to be given a little background. And let me do that now. As chairman of CARICOM, which position I held in early 2020, I think it was, just before COVID, because my term ended in the first July of COVID. One of the things that was on the table on an ongoing basis at every CARICOM meeting was the need for us to improve our response, and I dare say our relations with the United States with respect to focusing on the pressing problems of CARICOM. One of those very pressing problems, you may recall, as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I was one of the Prime Ministers who was delegated to go to Washington to talk to the politicians there about the banking issue, because we were experiencing in CARICOM and all threatened with an exclusion from the world banking business because of a variety of reasons, the main one being that we were being accused of being too risky. Banking with Caribbean banks were too risky in the new arrangements of international banking, and there were some things that international banks were saying that if they did business with us and they got exposed, the penalties were too great. So even if we had not done those things yet, the risk of them happening to them was so great that the way to treat with us was to cut us out of the correspondent banking, meaning that our local banks could not transact business between us and foreign banks and individuals abroad who want to do business with us. That was a huge, huge problem, and it had begun to happen. Some banks in some of our territories were being de-risked. Other banks were facing restrictions and so on. So the threat of the banking system shutting down on us caused us to want to get relief from that. So we started talking to the United States, and we did in the end have a hearing before the U.S. Congress, a committee led by Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who was at the time chairing the banking committee. And I think that's a good point for me to take a little rest and ask the Minister of Finance, because he may want to withdraw soon after if he chooses to talk to us about our Trinidad and Tobago's Heritage Fund, which seemed to have attracted the attention of some persons and information being put in the public domain in a particular way, where we in the government believe is not helpful. While it may have some elements of fact in it, the elements of misrepresentation and timing is something that the government cannot ignore. So I would like at this point, as I mentioned banking, and I'll come back to our relationship with the United States later on, but I want the Minister of Finance to treat with the Heritage Fund in an informative way for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, because if one only relies on headlines and interpretations of some people, one would get the wrong impression and take the wrong attitude to our circumstances. So it falls to the government to ensure that the population has a source of accurate information. So, Minister of Finance, you could take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. When I saw that Sunday Express headline and the associated article, I thought it was very important, and as you have just indicated, Prime Minister, it's very important to educate the public with respect to the true facts. Now, the fact is that as of Friday, the 9th of June, 2023, which is just a couple of days ago, the net asset value of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund was US 5.466 billion. That is just over 37 billion Trinidad dollars. That is an increase of US $754 million, or just over 5 billion Trinidad dollars, in the actual value of the fund over the last 9 months since September 2022. And if you exclude a deposit that we made in accordance with the law, and it has been a very long time. I think the last time deposits were made in accordance with the law in terms of surplus revenues from petroleum was somewhere around 2007, 2008. Because after that, the deposits made to the fund by the former government were made with respect to a deficit budget where they borrowed money to put money into the Heritage Fund. But we actually generated a surplus and therefore used surplus funds to make a deposit to the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. We made that in December 2022. So if you remove that deposit, the fund has generated comprehensive income of almost $600 million in the last 9 months. So the figures, the data, the conclusions in that Sunday Express article are 8 months old, out of date, misleading and wholly irrelevant, because the value of the fund fluctuates over time, as do all sovereign wealth funds. And I'll give you another bit of information. And by the way, this document I'm reading from will be circulated to all media. The net asset value of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund has increased by US $327 million, over TT2 billion, in the last 6 months, between January 23 and June 23. And this is without any deposits into the fund from the government during that period. If you look at the volatility of the global equity market, because this is what is important, you can't adopt a simplistic or amateurish approach to data. You must do research. So if you look at the volatility of global markets in the last couple of years, looking at our own fund, during the two-month period, May 15th to June 19th, 2020, in the middle of COVID, the fund increased in value by $297 million, 2 billion TT in just 2 months. More strikingly, again during COVID, during the 2-week period, April 3rd, 2020 to April 17th, 2020, that's just 14 days, the value of the fund increased by US $286 million, again close to 2 billion Trinidad dollars. So if, and I have to use this word, if the inverted logic of the Express article is to be followed, the fund managers should have received a national award for increasing the value of the fund by $2 billion in 2 weeks. But you have to have a long-term vision for these things. That's all investment funds have long-term objectives. Now, the annual report of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund for the 12-month period ending September 30th, 2022, which seems to be the basis for that article, was laid by me in Parliament on the 3rd of February 2023, 5 months ago. And it has therefore been in the public domain for 129 days. It's curious that the Express waited 5 months to comment on that report. Now, it's public knowledge that 2022 was an extremely challenging year for market players and sovereign wealth funds, with volatile geopolitics, high inflation, rising interest rates, especially in the United States, very important for anybody who wants to do a proper analysis of global equity markets. When interest rates rise, money moves out of the stock market into fixed deposits. That's what happens. When interest rates drop, money moves out of fixed deposits into the stock market. So in 2022, you had geopolitics, inflation, rising interest rates, which resulted in a very negative return for stocks and bonds all over the world. It was the first year in history that the size of the global equity market shrunk. There were heavy falls in stock and bond markets, and that cut the combined value of the world's sovereign wealth funds for the first time ever. In fact, there's a report by a report on state-owned investment vehicles by a highly regarded industry specialist called Global SWF Company. They found that the value of assets managed by sovereign wealth funds around the world dropped by $900 billion US, 6 trillion Trinidad and Tobago dollars. I'll take Norway's wealth fund, for example. Norway is one of the world's largest investors. In fact, it was only recently overtaken by China in January of this year. Norway's wealth fund posted a record loss of 1.64 trillion crowns. That's the Norwegian currency, or US $164 billion in 2022. It lost 15% of its value in 2022. And ended a 3-year run of soaring profits as stocks and bonds were hit by the Ukraine war and inflation. That's what happened in 2022. In Saudi Arabia, the market value of the general index decreased by 528 billion reals, 142 US billion dollars, 24% decline. Other funds all over the world reported similar difficulties. The China Investment Corporation, which manages the People's Republic of China Fund, said in November 2022, when it published its 2021 report, that it was being confronted with a complex and trying external environment in 21 going into 2022. The China Fund, a private equity fund, which invests in Chinese companies, lost 24% of its value in 2022. So there's nothing unique about the performance of Trinidad and Tobago's Heritage and Stabilization Fund in 2022. And, more importantly, like other sovereign wealth funds around the world, our fund has recovered strongly to the tune of over US $700 million since the close of the last fiscal year in September of last year. The Sunday Express article contained none of this. No research, no analysis, no information on the performance of global equity markets or wealth funds between 2022 and 2023. It failed to educate and inform the public. And just an interesting point, the graphics in the article are interesting because you have the front page major headline announcing a US $913 million loss, and then a very small, very difficult to read box in the upper right-hand corner of the article, where I will have to say it is reluctantly acknowledged that the fund experienced a turnaround in the last 3 months of 2022. But that little box didn't tell you that between September 2022 and December 2022, our Heritage and Stabilization Fund increased its value by $400 million US, just 3 months. So this very misleading article was followed by an equally uninformed editorial in the Express today, which bemoaned the fact that the fund lost 16% in 2022, and according to that editorial, this will become political fodder in the upcoming local government election. But the editorial writer did not understand the irrelevance of its irresponsible commentary, since by June 2023, this month, the fund has increased its value by 16% since that report in September 2022. I also want to make the point that withdrawals from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund over the last 7 years and 9 months have totaled almost US $1.9 billion. This was used to fund the national budget in difficult periods, COVID and so on. And when you take that withdrawal of $1.9 billion over the last almost 8 years, and the adverse temporary effects of that very challenging year in 2022, and you understand that the net asset value of the fund on June 9, 2023 is approximately US $5.5 billion. Guess what the asset value was when we came into office? $5.5 billion. So it means that this fund has generated 12 billion Trinidad dollars in comprehensive income since we assumed office in 2015. Let me say that again. The Heritage and Stabilization Fund has generated 12 billion Trinidad dollars in income since September 2015, and its value today is the same as it was then when we came into office. And I will finally say, I noticed the usual uninformed commentary by the usual critics, especially those at the university. I would simply say that this kind of uninformed commentary based on erroneous and misleading articles is just unhelpful. Thank you.
I would ask, turn off your mic, please. I would ask Minister Imbert to stay with us and hold, just in case you have any questions on this matter. I allowed that intervention because I really am concerned that there's a deliberate attempt in this country to publish misinformation in the hope that it would influence some people to behave in a particular way. How that behavior is and where, I don't know. But there is a deliberate attempt to publish, to introduce lies and general misinformation in the hope that the public will be guided by it. I don't want to tell anybody how to do their work, but when you represent the country's interests in the way that it has been represented, and when you misstep in attempting to get people to believe that their circumstances are worse than they are, then the government has a duty to rectify the situation by providing, as often as it happens, the correct information. And I will come back to that later. I go back now to the CARICOM dealing with the issues with the United States. So we started off seeking greater collaboration with the United States when we were threatened by the banking business loss. And there were some other issues that were of interest, I should say, and were priority items for our CARICOM colleagues. And those issues were deportees. Well, you know about that. The Americans sending back to us persons with criminal record who they treat with and then dump them back on our airports without notice. We had to fight that, asking for notice and some involvement in this. We've made some progress there. And of course, there was the banking. Then, of course, come 2020, there was COVID and the vaccine issue. I need not go over that as to how we had to fight worldwide. Being here, losing people, losing lives, COVID spreading, and we could not buy a vaccine. We had, again, that required serious intervention and diplomacy around. And then, of course, regional security and this whole question of the growing flow of arms and ammunition, small arms initially, and then more recently, a flow of heavier military-grade weapons in our society. And Trinidad and Tobago, we know that more than many others, but everybody else was involved in having the same kind of issue from St. Kitts, St. Lucia, Jamaica, Antigua, Grenada. All of us had this problem. And Trinidad and Tobago, we've got it bad. And of course, the whole question of the discussion on climate change and the response to climate change, where in Trinidad and Tobago's case, we as a trader in hydrocarbon products, we're being lectured to as to how we should get out of the business and replace it with renewables, which are expensive items, and it takes time for it to be done, and our economy has to completely retool to be able to make any significant change there. We had to fight and continue to fight for our place in the hydrocarbon market. But whatever was being legislated or lectured abroad with respect to climate change response, Trinidad and Tobago had to make sure that our diplomacy and our business is center stage, and our priority remains one of a sovereign nation seeking to defend its economy and its people. So these were the issues that were on the table at the level of CARICOM leadership meetings. Every single leadership meeting I went to, these were the issues that were the main items on the agenda. And we were beginning to feel as if we were not being listened to, not being heard. And coming up was the meeting of the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. And we had this bag of issues that needed to be addressed with our partner, our major trading partner in case of Trinidad and Tobago, our major supplier of people to the tourist sector as our other territories, and of course, our closest neighbor and the most powerful economy in the world. It was our view at the level of CARICOM that these issues require face-to-face contact and discussions between us and the United States. So we went to the meeting in Los Angeles, and there were some very tense moments there. But thankfully, it turned out that we did get an audience, a very significant audience, with the President of the United States, all CARICOM heads, and Dominican Republic. We met with the President, and we were able to put these issues squarely, not through any third-party arrangement or diplomatic note and démarche. We spoke directly to the President of the United States and the Vice President about what was ailing CARICOM, what was irking CARICOM, what could be done and what should be done in the context of a group of friendly neighbors seeking to get a better arrangement. And it was Trinidad and Tobago's position, our leadership position on this matter, saying that CARICOM is stronger when we are together. Once we speak and act and move together, CARICOM cannot be ignored. We are stronger together. I need not raise the issue of the infamous meeting in Florida of some of our leaders and others who were not there. However, by the time we got to Los Angeles, we were all there, and we all took part in two very significant meetings in the United States. Arising out of this contact, this very valuable contact with the President and the heads of CARICOM, the President offered an opening to solve one of the problems that we raised. And the problem was that we do not have enough access to the United States decision-making levels. And to deal with that, the President immediately offered, and we accepted, an arrangement where CARICOM and the United States at the very highest levels would meet at least once a year. As a result of that, being the outcome of our contact and discussions, the President, listening to our concerns of the moment and the future, decided that what we should do is to put three major groups to work, technicians led by politicians, to work on three issues: food security, energy security, and finance. And the political leadership would come, the Vice President would chair that arrangement, and co-chairs will come from CARICOM. The food issue was being chaired by the President of Guyana. The energy issue co-chaired by Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and the finance issue being co-chaired by the Prime Minister of Barbados. And we immediately went to work. And the President of the United States gave us the assurance that once technical people did the work, the government of the United States would respond urgently. So we met with the Vice President in April of 2022. We met again in June of 2022, and in September we met. And this meeting that just took place in Nassau was a furtherance of this situation, where CARICOM and the United States were meeting at the highest level, treating with specific issues that were of concern to us, that we were experiencing. And coming out of that, I could mention a few things to you. But we here in CARICOM added ostensibly a fourth area, because it is what is of concern to us that we have to advance for the participation and assistance of the United States. And that fourth issue was the whole issue of regional and national security in the face of the proliferation excuse me, and use of small arms and military-grade weapons in our societies, on our islands. So, whereas Trinidad and Tobago had set out to deal with this issue as a national matter, because we were always pushing that together we are stronger, the CARICOM colleagues decided that we should make this a CARICOM issue. And that's where the whole idea of a symposium where all the CARICOM leaders would focus and be seen to be acting together on an issue of interest to all of us. So in Trinidad, we had this symposium, crime as a public health issue, and you would have seen the level of participation and involvement of CARICOM politicians and their technicians, largely from national security. So as a result of that, the commitment of the United States in this Nassau meeting saw that the Vice President trip delivered the administration's commitment to advance cooperation with the Caribbean. And it shared, in pursuit of that shared prosperity and security, the Vice President was able to announce some initiatives in the areas of security and firearms trafficking, the need for enhanced diplomatic presence in the Caribbean, the crisis in Haiti, which is another issue which would take a whole day on its own, and the United States partnership to address climate change. And we have something called the Partnership Addressing Climate Crisis, PACC 2030. And of course, the United States identified $100 million to be spent in a number of agencies and on a number of issues in the context of the matters I have just raised. Please don't look for a check being handed to us. It is funding a lot of agencies that deliver to us in a variety of ways. And most of that money would go to those agencies that are desperately in need of increased financial support, infrastructure, equipment, personnel and training and so on. So with respect to the concerns of prosecuting people who are trafficking in firearms out of the United States and also out of our countries, and under the heading of security and firearms trafficking, the Department of Justice identified their contribution as the placement of a Department of Justice firearms coordinator who will bolster the Department of Justice. That person will be named to coordinate this whole issue of monitoring and acting on firearms prosecutions, and who will be an experienced Department of Justice prosecutor. The creation of this position will elevate the critical issue and to help us take advantage of a piece of legislation that was passed in the United States in June, something called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And it really has to deal with making a greater effort against firearms traffickers and what you call straw purchases, people who buy firearms under dubious arrangements, meaning to trade with them for illicit purposes. That is to be focused on specifically. This is one of the very specific things that we asked the United States to do, saying that you can do more. And they've agreed to do more because their backyard is the source of the ammunition and the arms. Because we lost 605 people last year in Trinidad and Tobago, over 400 killed by firearms, which not one of those bullets, and maybe one or two of them, might have been not involving a weapon which was not made in Trinidad and Tobago. So we went to the source, And the US government is now alert to it and has put something in place to do further. And then here in Trinidad and Tobago, with US support, we have something called the Crime Gun Intelligence Unit. Because information is key, as you would have seen in the recovery of that galley last week. The authorities, the agencies require access to pertinent, useful information. Otherwise, the criminals will have the upper hand of you. But once you get the information, it is possible to act and either solve or cauterize the problem. So this Crime Gun Intelligence Unit, it facilitates collaboration and cooperation among regional and international law enforcement agencies, including the CARICOM IMPACTS, where IMPACTS is the Caribbean Community Implementation Agency for Crime and Security. We fund that. Trinidad and Tobago is a participant in there, and the other CARICOM governments, we fund it. And IMPACT's role is to focus on gathering information for the governments and the agencies to use to protect ourselves from these illicit traffickers and the inflow of arms and ammunition. And of course, we open an arrangement here now for IMPACTS to work more closely with and to get more support from the United States Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives. That department, it's called the ATF. And we do have an ATF presence in Trinidad and Tobago, and the closer relationship between that and our agencies can only be of use to us in fighting these criminals. And of course, we also are going to get assistance from Homeland Security Investigations, from Customs and Border Protection, and from the Bureau of Industry and Security and Interpol. All of these are us as governments, including the United States government, putting our agencies to work to put pressure on the supply of illicit items into our territories, to stop it and to prosecute those who are engaged, to make it. So this CGIU will address critical firearms investigation training and the needs in the Caribbean and help Caribbean partner nations to solve gun-related crime cases, deterring gun crime cases in the region and bringing criminals to justice. The CGIU will provide training on real-time collection, management, and analysis of crime gun intelligence and encourage information sharing with international law and enforcement partners. This is where the governments are, putting the environment in place to allow our agencies to become more proactive and more effective in responding, and with the participation and presence of the larger, better resourced and more experienced United States agencies. And then, of course, forensic information is very valuable in the prosecution and handling of crime scenes. And the regional forensic accreditation is something that will assist our governments and their agencies to use information picked up at crime scenes to be able to track the perpetrators and to bring them to justice. So the Department of State is now going to be working with us for this regional forensic accreditation, and the United States is going to help the Caribbean with forensic capabilities to bring our systems, not just Trinidad and Tobago, but all the others, up to international standards with a goal of achieving International Organization for Standardization accreditation. The United States undertakes to help to establish a regional forensic center of excellence in St. Lucia, in addition to continued support for forensic labs in other countries like Dominica and the Dominican Republic and Bahamas. Trinidad and Tobago, notwithstanding what we might think about ourselves, we are well ahead of many of the others, and we're not listed here, except that we too are taking giant steps to improve our forensic capabilities. You would have seen recently where the minister had opened the digital lab of the Forensic Science Center to be able to do more with ballistic interpretations. And we are working assiduously towards building a new forensic science lab of international standard. And that work is well advanced. And this project will support the collection of timely, reliable, and admissible forensic evidence to support criminal investigations and prosecutions, increasing efficiency, and to help lower the case backlogs, which is haunting all of us, especially Trinidad and Tobago. And to that end, the government intends to speak with the judiciary on matters of this nature to see how we as a government could assist in ensuring that the resources that we have work best for us. And of course, the Department of State will continue to increase capacity to Caribbean law enforcement partners by strengthening organizational and administrative structures and national police forces. And one aspect of this assistance is to help us to improve the administrative structures, improving internal affairs and criminal investigation capabilities, and upgrade police education and training. This is extremely important because it's not sufficient to have a large number of police officers if many of them are extremely poorly trained and are criminally inclined. The police service, the quality of the police service has to improve if we are to properly respond to the criminals and not be responding to ourselves in our own departments. So this whole idea of improving internal affairs in the police service, and of course training of police officers, and a significant amount of the funds I mentioned in that $100 million offer from the United States, a fair amount of that is going to go into things like this, improving our ability to uptick upstamp the quality of training that our officers get. And that will better equip law enforcement partners to respond to crime which are perpetrated by illegal firearms and other aspects of misconduct, and bring about improved public safety and public safety planning. There's also to be, alongside assistance from the United Kingdom, the United States will leverage the presence of a senior criminal justice advisor in the Caribbean to mentor local practitioners and judges to improve the criminal justice experience of victims and witnesses and enhance public legal education. And of course, there are many other areas of interest, and I ask you, I'm sure by now the United States would have put it on their website. We too would have put a document on our website. So if you go to the websites, the relevant websites, members of the media and the public, you will find greater detail of this aspect of our interaction with the United States, our commitment from the United States, and other interests which should be of interest to us. One I want to mention is the Caribbean Climate Investment Program, where the United States is offering to provide a $20 million investment subject to USAID funds being available, they say. And this is for technical assistance and business development services through the CCIP to enterprises which are deploying technologies in renewable energy. What it does, it makes more money available for a greater effort in dealing with matters relating to an appropriate response to the climate change challenges. And this is useful. And on a smaller scale, the program will offer matching grants of up to $1 million US to catalyze climate-related businesses in the Caribbean. So people in Trinidad and Tobago who are inclined to get involved in that kind of business, this is another area where good support can be available once you have a good project and a good program that you can impress the donors with. With respect to disaster relief, this is something that you would have seen some Caribbean territories after one hurricane virtually on their knees and struggling. We've made the case to the United States, and we're making it to other countries, especially those big countries that have the issues of responsibility for what's happening to us with respect to climate change, that they need to take some responsibility when disasters occur in the Caribbean, arising out of weather and so on. So now the USAID will provide nearly $15 million to support disaster risk reduction, emergency response capacity strengthening, and resilience building throughout the Caribbean. This will reflect itself in better preparedness better emergency logistics, and regional and national governments and having their first responders better able to respond. So the preparation and the funding of what is required for that improved preparation will get a 15 million US support from the United States. And the last comment I want to make here is something that has been raised, and that is, well, it's more than raised. A decision has been taken, and we hope it goes to the logical conclusion not only for the World Bank, but for other banking entities, and that is something called a climate resilient debt clause. Means that when the governments borrow money from these agencies, and hopefully from international banks as well, in the event of a disaster, those borrowing documents, the loan documents, should carry a condition that in the event of a major disaster, the territory should immediately get relief in the form of moratorium on the loan. We had a situation where Dominica was almost wiped out by a hurricane, and the month after, instead of finding money to look after people who had lost their homes and children didn't have food and schools couldn't open, they had to find US dollars to pay debt 1 month after with money that they didn't have. And so small island nations, small island developing nations have this issue, where as we face the disaster of hurricanes and coastal erosion and other kinds of atmospheric problems, we have to pay debt even when a disaster strikes us down. So we are asking, and we've got US agreement, that these loan documents should head in that direction, where that moratorium post any major disaster should kick in and provide relief and space for these small territories and territories like us to be properly able to respond to the emergency while at the same time not defaulting on the debt that you might have incurred to conduct our business. So this climate resilient debt clause is something that we grasp with both hands, and we'll advance it not just to the Bretton Woods institutions like the World Bank and of course the IDB and so on, but we'll want to advance it to the international banking community, which prosper from the loans they they sell to us. And when we get into trouble, we need them to be there with us. So these are the issues that have been attracting our attention at the level of the heads of CARICOM in recent months. And I dare say that we've made some considerable progress, because to be able to bring the United States around to accepting partnership in this in a much more detailed way. I mean, the United States has always been around with us in very many ways, but here it is. We need to ensure that today's issues are focused on today in such a way as to bring about the amelioration that we anticipate or the exclusion that we strive for. In Trinidad and Tobago's case, we have, I should tell you, we have, just before we shut in fact, the very month that we closed our border, which was March of 2020, I think we closed, it was early March. I had just come back from a trip to Ghana, and I was preparing to receive an American delegation here led by the chairman of Homeland Security, where we had been to Washington and had made a lot of these arguments to various committees. And we had a commitment from the chair of Homeland Security, Benny Thompson. He was due to visit on a 3-day visit with a delegation to Trinidad and Tobago on these very specific matters and some others I have not mentioned. And that visit had to be cancelled because COVID overtook us and we had to close our borders for some extended period of time. In the meantime, there have been changes in the United States, and we have had to reopen those discussions with other people and maintain it with the ones that we were involved with and so on. And one of the things we did raise there was our concern about the aged aircraft that we were using. Our fixed-wing aircraft that we use for border patrol and search and rescue. Our Air Guard has 2 very old aircraft that we had become very concerned about. These are very expensive specialist aircraft, and we've been asking the United States to help us to replace those aircraft. And they don't only serve Trinidad and Tobago, but the Southern Caribbean, because if there's a loss of Grenada or St. Vincent at sea, there's an emergency, it is Trinidad and Tobago's assets that are immediately called into play as a first responder. Not to mention our own borders, patrolling it from the constant attempt by South Americans to penetrate our border. We had a listening ear at that time, and as we renew these discussions recently, I'm pleased to announce that the discussions are bearing fruit, and we are in the process, and listen to me carefully, we are in the process of receiving from the United States 2 new specialist aircraft to replace the ones that we have there. That's a very welcome development. The process is underway, and you'll hear more about that as we go forward in not too distant future, and we look forward to the day when we receive those 2 aircraft. And there's something else that you should notice. As a result of the position that we've taken at these committees in the United States and in our CARICOM meetings, where all our positions are public at the end, we put out various communiques and other people are paying attention. And we put a lot of effort in the last 2 years into talking to people in Washington. And we're pleased to see where members of Congress propose a bipartisan roadmap for U.S. engagement with the Caribbean. That is a very significant development where 3 United States congresspersons, one from Texas, one from Florida, and one from New York, they are piloting legislation which they hope could modernize United States engagement with Caribbean nations. So here it is. We pressed this button at the Los Angeles conference, which was last year, June. It is now 1 year later. And what I just outlined to you there as specific commitments and involvement of the United States has happened. And now, separate and apart, without us being involved directly, the United States' own congressmen and women are seeing the need to agree with CARICOM that there is need for a modernization of the United States engagement with the Caribbean nations. That conversation has worn well and is bearing fruit. And we look forward to success here, and we feel much better off now than when we were invited to the meeting in Los Angeles last year. We will continue to have these meetings with the United States and continue to ensure that Caribbean leadership in CARICOM and the Dominican Republic stay true to the position that we are stronger when we are speaking with one voice together. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, you can find a whole lot more on this on the websites of the governments and the United States website as well. There's a lot of interesting information there on this matter, and if you have any further questions, we'll take them a little later in the proceedings. I come to a group of other issues now. Remember, we had the Minister of Finance a while ago. I just want, because I'm here with you, to clarify a few things, and I want to do so in the context of what I said a while ago. We have noticed a deliberate attempt to spread misinformation, and official spokespersons for the country tell deliberate lies to the country. And it is for the government, as if we didn't have enough work to do, to spend time debunking some of these situations. I mean, a simple matter like the opening of a building, which I did on Saturday. We took possession of the Diego Martin Corporation administrative building. I must say it's a fine building. The effort was worth it, and yet another corporation has now got proper, comfortable offices for the staff and easy access and good office arrangements for the public that will use the facilities from that corporation. To my surprise, yes, I am surprised. I mean, because while I don't expect much from some of my colleagues, I really was surprised to see a press conference by the official opposition of Trinidad and Tobago telling the population that the Prime Minister should have been wearing a hard hat because he was in fact on a construction site and producing pictures to show scaffolding and worrying about my safety because things could have fallen on my head on the site. That is the official opposition of Trinidad and Tobago. Absolute, unadulterated lie. What shocked me is that the press was there. We invited the press to the function. We were under a tent in the car park. And after the function, the press was invited to tour these very modern, fine facilities, which included showing them the updated computer data banks that the ministry is going to be using to introduce Diego Martin Corporation to the new digital Trinidad and Tobago, and probably might even be the pilot agency for that in local government. The press was shown that, and the press was escorted throughout the building. New furniture, everything comfortable. And in the face of that, the opposition sees it fit to fabricate a lie, call a press conference, and put that out to the public. For what purpose? Only you can tell. But it is par for the course today, because I am sure that whoever chose to write about the Heritage Fund with all the information available, and if you are worthy of treating with that subject, you should have been able to provide information to the public that was useful, and not just information earmarked to cause panic that the Heritage Fund has lost $900 million. Anybody who knows anything about the Heritage Fund and is worthy of writing a story on it had available information that, like what the minister gave you this morning. But what the minister gave you there was not required. It was counter the agenda. And of course, coming down to visit with the media in tow, showing you yet another government office for the good reasons that it has been built, you had to go and call a press conference, and 2 members of parliament sit down there showing pictures and misrepresenting the pictures to put a deliberate lie that the government opened a construction site at the Diego Martin. I invite you, the media, to call up the Diego Martin Corporation, ask for a tour. Anybody who questions what I'm saying, ask for your own personal tour. And I authorize and I beg the Diego Martin Corporation Authority, anybody from the media who call and ask for a tour from the media, give them a tour of the facilities that was opened on Saturday, and see if you could find anywhere in there requiring a hard hat. It was made clear in the proceedings that that building has 2 operators, 2 owners. On the northern half is the government, on the southern half is FCB. FCB is opening its business there, I'm told, in a matter of a few days. And Diego Martin Corporation has moved into that building. The building is ready for use. The corporation is moving into it. Yet the official opposition would do something like that. You have to ask yourself, why would the state officials set about to create lies even when the lies have no taste, no value? The press was at the function. Anybody could check that. Any member of the media who was at that function could check whether what is being said by the opposition is true. But the opposition in Trinidad and Tobago, like the rest of the world, has chosen to tell lies as part of the narrative. Long ago, it used to be a shame to be identified as a liar. Now, you're deemed to be brilliant if you can use lies. And as if that is not enough, I want to touch on a piece of public administration. I have made it very clear, subsequent to the election in Tobago, which brought about a change of administration, as the senior politician in the country, leading the premier political party in the country, my party was defeated in Tobago, summarily dismissed from office after 2 decades of service. We took that in stride as par for the course. And I personally led the government's response to the transition in Tobago. I personally led that. The very first thing I did was to go to Tobago with a large delegation of ministers, a number of key ministers, Attorney General, Minister of Finance, Minister of Works, Minister of Tourism, and invited this new administration, which was full of young people, all of them inexperienced, invited them to sit down and assisted them with how the ministries function and what is required from the central government, what is required from them. And we spent half a day together, quietly and civilly, doing that for the transition, for the benefit of the people of Tobago. Subsequent to that, I gave instructions at the level of the cabinet that there are people who from time to time will seek to bait you into confrontation with the Tobago House of Assembly. No minister of this government is to get into any confrontation with anybody in the Tobago House of Assembly or its administration. If there are difficulties, the difficulties will be identified and will be dealt with in a civil and authorized manner. I myself had quietly, from time to time, I would meet with the Chief Secretary and we will talk like civilized people. Today, there is no administrator in Tobago, chief administrator, because that's the most senior public servant in Tobago is the chief administrator. This absence of an administrator in Tobago came about as a result of the administrator who was in office reaching retirement age. There are 2 loci of government administration in Tobago. One is the THA, that has as its senior public servant, the chief administrator. So regardless of the politics and the seats and the political party, the senior public servant in the assembly is the chief administrator. But there's the central administration service in Tobago called CAST, which is under the Prime Minister's office. That office has as its senior person another public servant in the capacity of permanent secretary. The chief administrator and the permanent secretary are roughly on the same level, and things were going fine until this administrator came to retirement age. I met with the chief secretary. We sat and chatted for an hour and a half on matters Tobago. One of the matters that was raised in that discussion was the requirement to agree on a new chief administrator. I at the time was unaware of the actual date of the retirement, but I knew that that will come to me from the Public Service Commission, because these 2 positions, permanent secretary CAS, chief administrator, are public service positions. I'm a politician, the chief secretary is a politician. We have to respect the role of the independent Public Service Commission, which treats with public servants. The public administrator will be sought by the Public Service Commission and identified. That commission will make a recommendation to the Prime Minister's office asking for no objection. The Prime Minister under law, before dealing with that, has to consult with the Chief Secretary. And after that consultation, a decision can be made as to who the senior public servant will be to become the chief administrator in the THA. That is the law. So I was aware of the vacancy. I'm expecting the commission to send to me its recommendation as the next qualified public servant in line. And of course, as I expected, the chief secretary was with me, and we had a recommendation, we discussed it, and we came to an agreement as to what should happen when the proceedings roll out. The Public Service Commission did its job. Knowing that this administrator was leaving, took steps to see who was the next in line and to recommend it to the Prime Minister's office for the Prime Minister's attention. And the Prime Minister, of course, will have to cover by ensuring that the Chief Secretary is in on the discussions. That recommendation got to the Permanent Secretary in the office of the Prime Minister, but did not get to the Prime Minister. Because at the same time, on the same day that it arrived in the Permanent Secretary's office, in the office of the Prime Minister, from the Public Service Commission, another piece of correspondence arrived, advising the Permanent Secretary that a new development has taken place. So the recommendation made by the Public Service Commission, which would have seen a smooth transition, that one was retired, next person in line, next most senior person, that was disrupted by a second piece of correspondence. So the second piece of correspondence came to the Prime Minister's office before the Prime Minister could even have seen the first piece of work from the Commission, because the first piece had been deemed functus. Because the person that was appointed to be appointed by the Commission, with the Prime Minister's agreement, if it was had, that person was suddenly interdicted. By interdicted, I mean, I'm advised that on the last day of the Chief Administrator going out of office, that office advised the Public Service Commission that the person in line to replace the administrator, not a public servant, who happens to have been at cast in the Prime Minister's office, that that person is now to be the subject of allegations of wrongdoing and to be suspended. So the Commission now has no choice but to withdraw the letter which was sent to the Prime Minister's office, which was yet to be seen by the Prime Minister, by advising the Prime Minister's office that a withdrawal has taken place of so-and-so person, and that the process now has to start over with the Public Service Commission looking for the next person in line. And of course, the process of commission to Prime Minister to Chief Secretary would have to take place before an administrator could be had. And that is the reason why the Tobago House of Assembly does not have a chief administrator at this time. What I find worrisome and very disappointing is that the Chief Secretary met with me in the capacity of a public official running a part of the country, made a recommendation to me in the most innocent of way, and withheld from me the fact that it was the intention of the Assembly to take action against the person that they interdicted in the way I have just described. I am very disappointed in my Tobago colleague and colleagues, because I have gone out of my way to ensure that no accusation could be truthfully made that the government that I lead has done anything other than to facilitate the Assembly. So, when I heard the Deputy Chief Secretary, interestingly enough, the person speaking to the public in Tobago on this matter is the Deputy Chief Secretary. The Chief Secretary has gone AWOL, he gone missing. And the Deputy Chief Secretary, in the most haughty of ways, describing this problem as one that has to do with the Prime Minister. Because it is easy in Tobago When you get yourself in difficulty of competence or incompetence, you just blame Trinidad or blame the Prime Minister. I will have none of it. I've gone beyond the call of duty to ensure that no truthful allegation could be made against my office or against me with respect to the people of Tobago. And to listen to the Deputy Chief Secretary explaining that they can't do this and they can't do that in Tobago, the reason why there's no Chief Administrator is because of the actions of the Tobago House of Assembly, who claim to have some audit and who claim to use the results of the audit against a senior public servant. And I refuse to believe that when the Chief Secretary spoke to me on that day, an hour and a half he spoke, that he did not know that what he was doing at the level of the Chief Secretary was interdicting the officer who was in line to be the next post and putting somebody else up to me for my agreement. I find that deceitful, I find it disappointing, and I take note of the fact that not everybody who claim to be what they are is what they say they are. This simple act of ensuring that the officer was interdicted ties in with accusations made moons ago, political accusations made. I don't know if you are aware that there is serious legal matter. I discovered after, I was never told, that the senior officer in the Prime Minister's department in Tobago at CAS was the subject of meetings between himself and the Assembly under the cover of lawyers. Nobody told me that in Tobago. I discovered that this weekend, that this development was taking place in Tobago. And when the senior public servant at CAS was to be appointed Chief Administrator, this trigger was pulled. So I want to say to Tobago, another difficulty arose, because once this second vacancy was created, it fell to the commission now to go to treat with the replacement person. As fate would have it, there's a vacancy on the commission. That vacancy is to be filled by the President after consultation with the Prime Minister and leader of the opposition. So that has to take place. That is now taking place. And when that has been done and the commission is properly constituted, then the commission would fill the void that has been created 2 steps down by the interdiction of the officer who was head of department of the Prime Minister's office. I am saying here that these are the facts, and the Tobago House of Assembly personnel, they are entitled to their stories, but they are not entitled to their own facts. The other issue I want to mention is the concern that 2 of my parliamentary colleagues have. There are 3 issues I want to mention before I close. One is the concern that Representative Moonilal has for the expenditure of $3.4 million on the regional symposium, which I can say to the country, because we have acted together, the benefits that have come up from that are way beyond the 3.4 billion million that caused us to be noticed and to be taken seriously where it matters. But MP Moonilal is there frothing at the mouth, concerned about taxpayers' money. That 3.4 million was properly spent, government expenditure, spent in full public view and reported to the Parliament. Nothing to hide. But he has so much interest in 3.4 million of taxpayers' money. But he has no interest in the fact that state company EMBD is in the court fighting him and a number of other persons and contractors, where the EMBD claim is for and I have a document here which says amount wrongfully over-certified, $149 million. EMBD is a state company. And that state company is in the court making case that it's against a number of contractors and the minister, former minister. There's a judgment of the court, Justice Aboud, ruled on this matter, where those people who are accused try to tell the court, throughout the case, there's nothing here. The state company is fishing. The judge ruled that is not so, and that they must put in their defense. To this day, none of them have put in a defense. None of them have put in a defense. So while Mr. Moonilal is there fraughting about $3.4 million for the Caribbean Symposium in CARICOM, he has a defense to put in the court to account for hundreds of millions of dollars that contractors were facilitated with under his portfolio, to the extent where he's a defendant in the court. They appealed the matter, and they went to get the judge's position overturned. The appeal court has ruled in favor of the state enterprise, EMBD. And as we stand here now, Mr. Moonilal and others have to put in a defense in the court to this claim for the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars in a state company. I need not go into the details. You can find it for yourself because it's not new. This was $400 million of money that was spent in about 2 months, just before the last election of 2015, where the contractors received the money and purportedly would have completed the job and got paid in a matter of weeks. The claim in the court, right, is one of conspiracy. The court has ruled that there is a defense to be put in to the accusation made by the state company. But if I just use one column in this document, where the contract was for over $400 million. $436 million of contract. Total value of work certified, $280 million certified. Actual value of works done, $130 million. Contractors claim $221 million. So if the state does not fight this matter based on the claims that the state company made there, if the taxpayers don't prevail in the court, this is a $220 million that the said taxpayers are liable for. But he's concerned about $3.4 million spent in furthering our fight against the criminal element with new initiatives and a new partner coming in with us in the best way. I could tell you that symposium, in terms of generating interest in our security agencies around the region and governments acting together and the United States acting with us, it has been a resounding success. So I want to ask Mr. Moonilal whether he has any time to put in his defense in protection of the taxpayers' $221 million that is in the court now. And I ask you, the media, to advise the public as this matter progresses through the court. 2 steps have gone already in the court, but there's silence in the country. The first step is the Justice Aboud ruling that nobody seems to know and want to know. The second step is the appeal court saying, put in your defense, you have a defense to put it in. They waited until they win the next election, according to them, to annul these matters, as they hoped would have happened in the Miami situation. That's what it's about. That's what it's all about. And the next one I want to mention is one from Mr. David Lee, because he put a question to the Minister of Energy about a lawyer who he claims works for the Ministry of Energy. And the lawyer's name I will not call, but I will say to you that this lawyer first worked for the National Gas Company in 2014. He was brought into the picture to work for the state's company. He's a specialist, high quality specialist. In 2014, he was hired. Therefore, we didn't hire him. But we found him to be an outstanding lawyer. And we've kept him for his skill, his service, his integrity, and his dedication. We kept him. And he's an integral part of the legal team. All that we have managed to do takes a whole day to outline to you in the energy sector. And we told you from day one, we use our team of local lawyers and foreign lawyers to be able to confront and to match and to get agreement in our discussions with those multilaterals. It is the first time in the history of this country that a government and its agencies sat down with the multinational companies that run our economy and match them in our discussions and get them to agree on positions that we have advanced for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So this particular lawyer is working for the state. So David Lee is interested in him. You know, what is the issue? In fact, let me point out, it just so happens that this weekend, 2 lawyers' names came up in the papers. I don't want to mix them up. One of them came up for fraud. And it was fraud against the BIR. And his matter was settled with some agreement with the BIR. And so that is not the lawyer I'm talking about. I'm talking about the one whose firm the judge ruled on and accused the firm of negligence because somebody in person presented themselves with a passport for ID. And the ID was the person. But I discovered, as a result of this, I now discover that passports have 2 numbers on them. The numbers are written in 2 different places. One at the top, very easy to read, clear on top, passport number. At the bottom, in what looked like Roman language, the number appears there again. The fraudster, the fraudulent passport, they made a 1-stroke error in that number at the bottom. And as a result of that, the law firm wasn't able to pick it up at the time. But you better pick it up because passports are used face-to-face. Is that you? Yes, that's your face. That was the nature of that business. As a result of that, I now know that I must look at the bottom of my passport. I never looked there before to see what that Romanesque looked like. The bottom line is, we heard the court's ruling, we looked at the situation, and we are convinced that there's nothing in the judgment to prevent the state from continuing to use the brilliant services of the said lawyer. And that is the government's position. So, Mr. Lee, don't bother to ask no question in Parliament. You'll get your answer today. But I want to ask you a question. Since when you could be so concerned about a lawyer who didn't see Romanesque language on the bottom of a passport, and the public is at risk, and the country is at risk, but you could be in the Parliament in a position of trust, making law and questioning the Prime Minister while you on $1 million bail for fraud? What is all this? A man who is on $1 million bail for misbehavior in public office could be in the Parliament leading the opposition, questioning the Prime Minister, but he's concerned about the NGC lawyer. You understand the level of the hypocrisy? If you were so concerned about a person's individual conduct, you would have exempted yourself from the Parliament. But you're leading, and coming to ask questions, and the next question they want to do is to tell the Minister of Energy that this man must not work for the government because he's somehow unsuitable. Well, I'm saying that today. I, as Prime Minister, am saying I have looked at the situation, and it is my view that there's nothing in that judgment to prevent the ministry from using the expert skills that they have been using from this particular lawyer. And I want to hear nothing from David Lee. And finally, this season of telling lies by government officials. Last Saturday, there was a former UNC minister on a radio program. Former Minister of National Security was on a radio program. And when he was confronted with the behavior of the government of which he was a part, which had cancelled the OPVs, took back the money from London, $1 billion. How could you have done that with Trinidad and Tobago already being under a wave of illegal migration and all the negatives that go with that? What did you, and then somebody asked, what did you do with the money? You took back the money, what did you do with it? The former government minister, who has a lot to say in this country, he told the country on that radio program on Saturday that what they did, the UNC did, they cancelled the OPVs because we didn't need them. But they took the money and they bought the 12 damming vessels that the Coast Guard now has. Let me repeat that. A former UNC minister repeating the lies of the UNC, saying that when they cancelled the OPVs, fact, they took back the $1 billion, fact, and they used it to pay for the damming vessels that we have in the Coast Guard. People of Trinidad and Tobago, what are the facts? The facts are, in the leading up to the election of 2015, when that cancellation of the OPVs and the depriving of the Coast Guard of vessels to patrol our borders, and we were under an inundation of Venezuelans already coming to our country, the then government, in the season of the election, made a hurried deal with a company called Damen, which is a private company in Holland, private family company, to buy 12 vessels. The deal was made. 12 vessels. And the money that they paid had nothing to do with the paying for the items. It had to do with paying the finder's fee to the person who found damming for the UNC government. So when we came into government, there was a contract for these vessels. A few of them, the smaller ones, were being delivered already, and the rest had to be paid for by the contract. And let me tell you, you see this document? This is the External Loans Act, Chapter 7105, and it says order, made by the minister under Section 6 of the External Loans Act. This is from the Gazette, Legal Supplement Part B, Volume 55, number 58, 3rd of May 2016. May 2016, this Colin Imbert was the Minister of Finance in a government led by me, Keith Rowley. This Loan Act here is the document that we use to borrow the money to pay for the 12 vessels. It says here, and I'm going to read for you, external loans, ING Bank NV, Amsterdam, the Netherlands, order 2016. And whereas, and this is the content of the order, and whereas A, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, hereinafter called the Republic, and ING Bank NV Amsterdam, hereinafter called ING Bank, agreed that the ING Bank be awarded the mandate to arrange a covered export credit facility to finance and purchase of naval assets for use by the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard. B, by an export credit agency, covered buyer's credit facility agreement for 168 million euros. The exact figure is 168,532,101 euros. Executed on, and here the date, executed on the 26th of April 2016 between the Republic and the ING Bank. It was agreed that the lender of the facility assists with the financing of the acquisition of the vessels, navigation and surveillance systems, armaments and onboard interceptors, as well as the integrated logistic support, and customer and contract supervision and training services, spare parts and equipment and repair materials. And the overall agreement associated with the following, and I quote, A, 2 Damen fast cruise supply FCS 5009 utility vessels. B, 4 Damen stand patrol CPV and 6 Damen interceptors 102. 2 plus 4 is 6, plus 6 is 12. Those were the 12 vessels that the UNC contracted to buy from the UNC, which this government borrowed money to pay for. So when a UNC minister comes with UNC propaganda on the radio on Saturday to tell the country that the $1 billion they took from this cancellation of the OPV was used to buy the diamond vessels, that is a lie. And I will tell you, sometime in the future, I don't know exactly when, you will hear more about the payment that was made. I just told you about the payment that was not made. We made this payment to the suppliers. Right? I'm being told by the Minister of Finance, who did the calculation, $1.3 billion. That was the cost of those 12 vessels that we borrowed the money, because when we came in, there was no money, but there was a contract to pay. So I tell you this in the context of, like social media, anything you see there you have to check. So now apparently, anything you hear from officers in Tobago speaking about the Prime Minister's office, you have to check. And anything you hear from former ministers of the UNC, you have to check it. Even when there's a public opening of a building in Dogo Martin with the whole media in tow, they could call a press conference to tell you the building was a construction site under scaffolding and required hard hats. There's a construction next door. That was part of the conversation too. The road is being built. It's a construction site. FCB is preparing to move into its section of the building. That's going on. It has nothing to do with the Dogo Martin Corporation as an entity occupying the space in this building. But we are open to officials telling us lies on an ongoing basis. And I'm saying to you today, on every turn, whether it is the Express, whether it is the THA, whether it's the UNC in Parliament, or where, every time they lie to you, this government will come to you and tell you the facts. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll take them now.
Prime Minister, in terms of the CARICOM meeting, if you don't mind, with the US Vice President.
Go ahead.
The announcements that would have been made both by you and the US Vice President in terms of the cooperation, intelligence gathering, issue of firearms, being able to get, the objective being to get more illegal firearms and ammunition off the streets and so on. What is your hope or expectation locally that you could see before the end of this year a major turnaround in the level of murders and violent crimes by the use of guns?
It is my belief that if we put sufficient pressure on the criminal element, make the loopholes less slippery, make the supplies more difficult to have, that the criminals will find their business more difficult to carry out against the population. We just have to stay on the job and apply more and more pressure. And of course, on the parallel to that, we steer away from criminal activity the number of young people who seem to be on a conveyor belt towards criminal conduct by creating opportunities for more and more of them to choose lawful lifestyles. And that's why the Ministry of Youth Development, the government is putting more and more and more and more resources there to service more and more and more people. But I tell you one thing, in the context of your question, we talk here about external influence and an external response. My biggest concern and fear is the threat currently posed to us by legal actions or supposedly legal action in Trinidad and Tobago, which has put the nation's national security at great peril. I will tell you more at the appropriate time, in the appropriate place. But suffice it to say that my biggest concern right now is the danger posed by actions that we have taken here inside the Trinidad and Tobago.
Please give the population
No, I say no more for the moment.
another issue as well too. with the vacancy, as you had mentioned, with the chief administrator in the THA, could you have the population understand how does the THA function, or what does this mean in terms of its operation?
Well, senior public servant decision making and signings cannot be done by anybody but the designated officer. I saw somebody in Tobago saying that the chief secretary was not at a meeting because he was helping out in the absence of the chief administrator. I don't know what that means. What I do know is that we have to get a chief administrator there as quickly as possible so that Tobago's business, the signing of documents to facilitate the smooth operation of the assembly, that has to be done as quickly as possible. I have to wait until the president appoint a person to the commission, because that vacancy just so happens to be occurring at the time when this has happened in Tobago. And as soon as that happens, I expect that the commission will send something to me. I will then trigger the process of talking to the chief secretary again, and when that process, which is required by law, takes place, hopefully in a few days, we should get this thing sorted out finally.
During the meeting, if you don't mind, Prime Minister, during the meeting with the U.S. Vice President, I don't know if CARICOM as a unified body, or if you on a bilateral level, were able to have any discussions concerning the issue of sanctions against Venezuela, the U.S. sanctions, in the context of the fact that the provisional license by the U.S. authorities for the Dragon deal is a 2-year arrangement, and whether they could get any further advancement or did get any further advancement on that discussion?
Well, the first part of the question is yes, we at CARICOM, as a matter of fact, CARICOM, I think, for the first time, issued a very clear statement on CARICOM's position on the sanctions against Venezuela, asking the United States to lift those sanctions. And this wasn't a Trinidad and Tobago position only, it was a CARICOM position, because CARICOM at this last meeting spoke very forcefully about its need to participate in the Petro-Carib arrangement that is available to CARICOM if Venezuela is relieved of those sanctions. And in fact, evidence was presented to the meetings as to how CARICOM governments are straining to pay the full price for fuel, and the benefit that will come to them if they are able to access the discounted fuel from Venezuela, which I think the discount was 35%, and hundreds of millions of dollars of additional expense on the shoulder of CARICOM governments because they are unable to access what is available through Petro-Carib. So it's not just Trinidad and Tobago wanting access to the Dragon field or any other field for that matter. It is CARICOM wanting to do business with Venezuela. And on this occasion, there was a statement, if you go on the CARICOM website, I'm sure you'll see it there, where CARICOM had actually made a call to the United States to give our economies relief by allowing us to access is as part of our energy security, what is available from Venezuela. How the U.S. will react to that, I don't know, but I hope that they see the pressure that the CARICOM small states are under, and I trust that they will give us some relief. With respect to the other matter, our own matter, the discussions continue. We are heavily engaged with the United States at the appropriate level, and those discussions continue between us and Venezuela and us and the United States. And there's no more I can tell you at the moment, except that we remain on the job, we remain hopeful, and we have been talking to the people who make the decisions.
Prime Minister,
yes.
On the topic of Venezuela, in the past week, there has been some press conferences held about the heliport situation. There have been a couple of press conferences about the heliport situation, the migrant detention facility at the heliport. There was an allegation of abuse, serious abuse occurring. So it might be a time to look at the existence of the heliport. Is it really required? Because I think it was, the migrant facility there was set up as a holding facility for possible persons who may be coming in illegally with the COVID virus. I think that was the initial, the genesis of it. So I'm looking at several things here. You have the immediate situation that your good, hardworking minister would have been addressing in the meantime, but the actual setting up, the establishment of the heliport, has it kind of outlived its usefulness as the COVID has been declared and the other thing, actually, Prime Minister, before you go on, there are some serious human rights questions because the...
Let's think
okay, thank you.
Because I don't want to confuse this issue. The heliport as a venue for controlling illegal migrants until such time as the National Security Ministry advised the Cabinet that it should be disbanded, it remains for the moment. It did come into being in response to COVID, but it was also in response to the flood of migrants coming in. That flood seems to have abated, but there's still people coming in. And of course, the other place that people are held, the detention center out in Haripo. The bottom line about the allegations are made, as in any country. If similar allegations are made, there are specific entities within that country that will investigate those allegations. And to the best of my knowledge, the allegations were taken very seriously, and the requisite government department went in and investigated and could not find information to take further action at this time. My understanding is that the investigations may still be underway and they're requiring certain levels of cooperation. That is police work. It cannot be said that the state did not respond. I have seen people behaving as though, because of the seriousness of the allegations, we should handle it differently by just running emotional comments about it. It can only be handled by the requisite officers of state. There's a special department of the police service to treat with that. And those officers went in and did the requisite investigations. And we have to be guided by that. In the event that evidence arises, we have to rely on the skills and the law that allows our officers to go in and find that evidence if it exists. If the evidence is not found, there is precious little we can do with respect to prosecution. But in terms of the exposure of people to that kind of wrongdoing, we have to be mindful of that and ensure that the investigations are done by independent professional arms of the state. That has gone on, and that's where the matter is. I see also that there's some habeas corpus writ. So the matter is in the court somewhere. Somebody has gone to the court with a writ of habeas corpus to produce the person from the... there is in the police service something called a counter-trafficking unit led by senior officers who are dedicated to ensuring that our country is not a facilitator of wrongdoing against migrants. So I notice we always sell ourselves short. As soon as this came up, accusations start being made, the impartiality of the officers start being questioned. Well, there's nothing I can do about that. Nothing. But it has to be done by officers of state. We can't send the prison, we can't send the teachers, we can't send the orange vendor. If that allegation is made, it's a serious allegation, very concerning, and we dealt with it as the law permits, and we do have officers whose duty it is, whose job on a daily basis is to seek to prevent that and to prosecute it if it does happen. So we are quite comfortable that Trinidad and Tobago responded appropriately to the allegation. And the findings of the investigators, I have no new information of my own. I have to be guided by what the investigators produced to the state.
A concern I had was that this is a situation of military people who are not really trained on looking at civilian...
No, it is not.
Sorry?
It is not. The counter-trafficking arm is a police arm.
No, I'm sorry, I'm talking... Let me step back a second. I was talking about the Coast... Who's running the facility is Coast Guards men and soldiers, we believe. So, some members of defense. So the question is that whether this was like an accident waiting to happen, like...
I couldn't answer that question. What I could tell you is that at the time when we responded to the emergency, we used the resources that we had available and was appropriate.
I mean, because somebody would say, well, look, we have IDC trained officers who are trained. We have women's prison in prison service. Could they not have been brought in for a more immediate role?
That sounds good, but it may not be as good as it sounds. To put illegal migrants into the women's prison among our nationals is not a straightforward thing as that. This was a situation that was temporary. It was overwhelming. We had to use what facility we had. We had to use what officers we had. We've done so. What you have raised about whether it should continue in the absence of COVID is another story, which I'm pretty sure is being assessed, and we might have an answer for that in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, to look back in hindsight and say it should have been in the women's prison or in the children's prison or so, I don't think that's a useful discussion. We don't have facilities in the women's prison to say, well, okay, this is for migrants. And remember, it was not a one-off. It was a stream of people that was coming in here. We have also, that facility was used as a clearinghouse to repatriate a number of persons. So who you see there now is only what was left from the program.
Is there a need for any investigation or any independent person outside of the national security apparatus to have links? Because even the US State Department report did say that was one of their criticisms. While the regular prisons here do allow activists or whoever it is, but the immigration facilities don't allow...
Sean, I am not today going to be discussing with you what the US say about our prison and how we handle our matter. Because the US has worse that I don't get involved in. Right? We have handled it to the best of our ability, and as we go forward, if it is to be improved, we will improve it. But to tell me about what the US say, how it should have been handled, I move on.
Right, Minister, good day. Jesse Ramnew from CNC3. Just permit me to pivot for a bit. Over the last 48 hours, parts of South and Central, they've been hammered with some intense rainfall. Any update on your end? Any mobilization have taken place? Any resources deployed at the moment to assist areas that have been flooded out?
What I can say to you is that when I read the incoming weather forecast, I was in touch with the Minister of Local Government. I have asked him, and he has verily confirmed to me that all preparations were in place. They were all on standby. He sent me a lot of information as I was coming here. I haven't read it yet, but I've seen the what do you call the dashboard of what is happening, and the relevant departments are on the job. I think one person has been rescued, or either one or two persons have been rescued, and the Department of Local Government and the Ministry of Works and Transport, they are alert to it and on the job, because we were aware that we were expecting some inclement weather.
Professor, good afternoon. Priya Bihari, AZP News. I'm talking about the Dragon gas field. Do you still think that 2 years is enough time for us to see first gas from that?
I don't know that is a relevant question at this time, because the 2 years only begin to run after you get clearance for a license to operate. So let us take it step by step. And we are doing the best we can in trying to do some commercial trade with Venezuela in buying gas. Whether it's Dragon Field or any other, we put a lot of effort into Dragon. The Venezuelans are willing to give it to us on a commercial basis, and we are working on that. So we don't, this 2 year thing, I don't know where that came from. Right? But you mean about the license? Well, the license only come into play, I mean, if the license, look, Chevron got 6 months, right? Chevron got a 6 months license. That is not impeding Chevron expanding its operations in Venezuela. And I think the 6 months were up recently, or about. So that is not one of the impediments, the length of the license. It is the access to the license to operate from Venezuela. That's where the obstacle is.
And there have been reports that you're going to stand back train 1 Atlantic. Is that?
I don't know where that came from, but you know, people publish anything in Trinidad and Tobago. I saw that, as a matter of fact, in all the discussions I've been in, that is not part of it. I don't know where that came from, because our issue right now is more gas for 2, 3, and 4. And if whoever writes that story, that person is not familiar or is ignoring the fact of what we have been doing to maintain our level of production, because remember every day we consume 2.6 billion cubic feet of gas. If we do get some replacement gas, the first thing we have to do is to use that gas to prevent our consumption from falling below the current level. So it's replacement gas. To talk about Trains 1, in the context of that article about some new field being found or opening up, and then that will cause Train 1 to open, that is coming from a source that knows nothing about what they're talking about. We have a shortage of gas with respect to the infrastructure we have in this country. That is what Minister Young has been talking in Washington all along, telling the decision makers we are the only country that has spare capacity. And to use that spare capacity, you have to have raw gas to keep your current level and go beyond the current level to a higher level. So that question about Train 1, and I couldn't figure out who the source was, because the article was so without foundation.
The meeting in Bahamas with the American VP, talking about a special prosecutor, he's about a coordinator. These people come from a different law. Their laws in America is different from us. How effective would that be, to help us with the justice system?
Well, we're not talking about practicing in courts here. We're talking about going after criminals and making cases against criminals who are identified in a collaborative way, right? So, and of course, if our people are breaking the law, they may find themselves under the jurisdiction of the special prosecutor up there. And if their people breaking the law up there, they certainly would fall under the prosecutor up there. So there is value in the DOJ looking in our direction. Yes, Jude.
Another question for the Finance Minister.
Yes,
for those who may not understand, the workings of a sovereign fund like the HSF, for example, does something like the impact of Russia's war with Ukraine on the international energy markets, does that have an impact one way or the other in terms of, let's say, the performance you described of the fund?
Of course. And there's something I didn't want to go on for too long, but there's a point I wanted to make. If you look at the quarterly report, which is on the Ministry of Finance website for the period October-December 2022, if you go to page 3 of that report, you will see the return on the benchmark. Now, the fund managers are benchmarked against an international benchmark called the Strategic Asset Allocation Benchmark. And the performance of the fund managed by the managers is measured against that benchmark. So if you look at the performance for October-December 2022, you will see that the return on the fund just for that period, and this is not an annualized return, it's an actual return, was 5.27% just in those 3 months. That's how it came up to 400 million. 427 actually. The return on the strategic asset allocation benchmark was 5.13%. So that's world. So in the world, the return on other sovereign wealth funds in the period October 2022 to December 2022 was 5.13%. Our fund managers returned 5.27%. So they beat the benchmark. For the particular year that was the subject of that unfortunate Express article, the benchmark return was 15.6% minus. So it was a negative minus 15.6%. So when you look around the world, the benchmark in 2022 was that all funds lost an average of 15.6%. Our fund lost 16%. So you're right there in terms of the benchmark. Now, quite often, the fund managers beat the benchmark. If you go back over the last 7 years or so, and you look at all the reports, you will see in each of them, there's a comparison between what our fund managers achieved and what the international benchmark was. And quite often, I would say more often than not, they have beat the benchmark. And in 2022, they were almost directly in line with the benchmark. So when we were looking at the 2022 situation, I can tell you we weren't sitting down and sleeping. We in finance were talking to the central bank, talking to the Heritage and Stabilization Fund Board all the time. And in fact, asked them to have regular discussions with the fund managers, regular discussions. Because when you're looking at your sovereign wealth fund and you're seeing it decreasing in value, as a Minister of Finance, I have to become concerned. And the advice we received after a lot of interrogation was, wait it out. Because what is happening in 2022 is completely unpredictable. You have the war in Ukraine, and then you have very high inflation in the United States, which caused the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates. And let me explain that. The Federal Reserve is very different to our central bank. Our central bank, when it decides to make an adjustment to our interest rates, it's called the repo rate. They look at growth in the economy, they look at the unemployment situation, they look at money supply, they look at inflation. So look at a whole range of things and then make a decision. And this is why our central bank has kept our interest rate down. They haven't changed it. Whereas the Federal Reserve in the United States has been constantly increasing from almost 0 to up to 6-7%. That is because by law, the Federal Reserve must increase interest rates when inflation goes up. That's the law under which they operate. It's a very narrow law. We in Trinidad and Tobago are not fettered by that kind of law. So that the fund managers said, wait it out. And it proved to be correct. As I indicated, we recovered $750 million in the last 9 months. In fact, if you go a little back in September, I was looking at it. If you go back to the 23rd of September, the annual report was to the 30th. The fund actually recovered $850 million over the last 9 months because of the expertise of the fund managers. And this is what happened all over the world. When the Norwegian fund lost 160 billion and the other sovereign wealth fund, Saudi Arabia, lose 24% of its value, they have fund managers too. And they all advised, this is geopolitics at its worst, ride it out. And you see the resurgence. I looked at the Dow Jones today, it's up. When you look at the performance of the US stock market in 2022, it crashed. And it's simply because of interest rates. I need to understand the relationship. When interest rates go up, people sell their stocks and their equities and they invest in fixed deposits. Right now, you could get 6 months treasuries in the United States for 4%. Unbelievable. 3 years ago, it was 0.1%, that kind of thing. So I hope that answers your question. Okay?
Minister, just before you leave, the explanation, the detailed explanation you gave at the start for the fluctuations in the performance, was that available in the report itself? Because I'm wondering now, if someone read the report and saw the figures, the 913 million drop, whether there was context within the report itself for understanding what took place.
Thank you very much for that question. The Heritage and Stabilization Fund Board publishes annual reports every year. You can go on the web, you'll see the report for 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, all the way up to 2022. By law, which is something I expect the media to know, the board is required to report, and I am required to lay in Parliament the report 4 months after the end of its fiscal year, which kind of mirrors ours. So I was required to send the 2022 report, and they were required to report to me by the end of January 2023. And I did send it to the Parliament, and on the first available opportunity, 3rd of February, I laid it. It was tabled. You can't read these things in isolation. I want you to understand the other point I made. Between 2015 and now, with the ups and downs, the fund has generated $2 billion in revenue. That's a net figure. So if you take out the 900, it means it generated $3 billion in revenue. When you even it out, you get $2 billion. So you see, it's unfortunate. If you're going to examine a complex topic, you need to understand what you're doing. You can't cherry pick. I use the examples of 2020. The fund, as I said, increased by $2 billion in 2 weeks. I remember one day, back in 17 or 18, as far as I can recall, the fund made a profit of $200 million in one day. Okay? You can't look at these things like that, because maybe a week later it might lose $100 million. You have to have a long-term vision. So when you're reading a report like that, you have to look at the quarterly report that comes afterwards, and you have to look at all the reports that went before, because it's long-term planning. You can't take one simple event over a continuum of 8 years. Okay?
There's just one thing I want to say on that subject, and I hope it's ended here now on that particular subject. And we've been going for 2 hours, so I think it's time we come to the end. In talking about this fund, I would like to ask our friends in the media, this fund provided us with the opportunity to make withdrawals during the COVID period. Significant withdrawals were made to bolster government's activity and sustenance during the COVID disaster. And at that time, there were people who were making those withdrawals harbingers of the death knell of the fund, and the government was being accused of acting in all kinds of ways. Today, even after those withdrawals, the minister could afford to report to you today that the fund is no worse off today than it was at the beginning 8 years ago. Yeah? So having provided us with the support during COVID, the fund still now has, by its earnings going forward, $5.8 billion, $5.5 billion in the fund. And the simple point I want to make is the article was unfortunate in that its tone and its headline had the effect of creating unnecessary panic, misrepresentation of the situation, and it only could have happened by someone who either did not understand what they were dealing with, or someone who deliberately chose to cherry pick a dung dip in the oscillation, because the fund earning is oscillation. It's tied to the U.S. market. The Minister of Finance looks at all those details. You know what I look at? In monitoring the fund, I look at Bloomberg every day, because I know what's going on at Bloomberg is going to affect our fund. When I saw the threat of the defaulting of the United States debt, I knew that if that happens, Trinidad and Tobago, like the rest of the world, will go into a tailspin. And of course, when I saw that there was an agreement and there will be no default, I know, well, we've gone past that threat. Because the fund earns from the United States commercial market. So if the American banks and the American businesses doing well, we have shares in those businesses. That's what you bought. You buy paper in those. You buy bonds, and if they do well, you earn. If they do badly, you drop. And that's what it is. And I think the population needs to be helped to understand that. And that article was not helping. It was just simply trying to get people to get the wrong impression about our circumstance. And that's just an extra job for the government. One more question, please. This is the last question. We've been going for 2 hours, so I think the time has come that I think we should grab it now.
The price of gas at the pump, are we going to see any difference, any maybe decreasing, given the price of oil and gas? What is the latest with that? Because there are promises that if the oil was certain way, we would have...
That is also something that is very volatile. You will have seen recently that OPEC decided to cut production. Price dropped, Saudi Arabia, sorry. Price jumped $7 in one day. So if we had tried to manipulate the price the day before, what would happen the following day? We'd have to send it back up again. So that is something you have to look at over a period of time. You can't jump to conclusions.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thanks for coming. Thanks for communication. Thank you.
This is TTT. Live for local.
by 20, 50 by 25.
This is Kyron Pollard. When you play, do it the legal way. Don't bet on illegal gaming.
Now you can win and drive when you play Win for Life. Your $10 Win for Life bet automatically gives you a chance to win a brand new Suzuki Vitara. That's right, now you can play once for a chance to win twice. Just match your 6 Win for Life numbers to the 6 Win and Drive numbers to win. The Win and Drive draw takes place right after the Win for Life draw, every Tuesday and Friday at 7 p.m. Play Win for Life to win and drive today. Players must be 18 years and over. Please play responsibly.
Welcome to this morning's Playway Pick 2 and Pick 4 draw, supervised by independent auditors KPMG and presided over by the National Lotteries Control Board. Good luck, everyone.
Good morning. Welcome to the NLCB's Playway Pick 2 and Pick 4 draw for Monday, 12th June 2023. First, we'll draw this morning's Playway number. And the winning number is 18. The lucky mark is Waterboat. That number is 18. The lucky mark is Waterboat. Our Mega Mix machine now has a Mega bonus ball in each chamber where you can win more Mega for your money. Win $36 when the Mega bonus ball calls, $80 with the Mega ball, $100 with the Mega Ultra ball, and $125 with the Mega Extreme ball. Now for our Mega selection.